Hello and welcome to the Dooley Noted on Parasympathetics, our rest and digest. First of all, we should talk about where things start and finish. As you'll see on this chart, we always start on a nucleus. Pre starts on a nucleus. The E's go together. Our post, our synapse, actually occurs on a ganglion because the big O in ganglion is for post. So here's a time where we actually synapse on a ganglion. For somatosensation, never synapses on a ganglion. That's just where you find nerve cell bodies. Same thing's true for special visceral afferent and special somatic afferent. So the only thing to ever synapse on a ganglion is autonomics, parasympathetics, and sympathetics. To watch the sympathetics, you can watch my video on the spinal cord and its out tracts and in tracts. For this one, we're going to focus just on parasympathetics. So again, to review, parasympathetics start on a nucleus in the CNS. This is nerve cell bodies located in the central nervous system. Look at the E's, how they go together, pre-nucleus. Then our axons sent on a presynaptic pathway over to a ganglion where we have our post-ganglionic nerve cell body. So postsynaptic is at a ganglion for the nerve cell body. And then we travel on a postsynaptic plexus or axon to get to our target organ. This is very consistent throughout the body. We tend to have a pretty long presynaptic pathway and a short post for parasympathetics. Okay, so let's talk about the different autonomic pathways for parasympathetics. Let's talk first about the things that control the constriction of our pupil and the accommodation of our lens for nearsightedness. Remember that parasympathetics are rest and digest, which means, when you're relaxing, you're trying to limit the total amount of light that's coming in the eye because you don't really need much. Or if you're reading close to you, like reading this chart, you should be relatively relaxed and therefore need more nearsightedness than farsightedness. That pathway starts on the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. That's our presynaptic nerve cell body. Its axon then hitchhikes onto the ocular motor nerve, which is cranial nerve 3. That heads over into the orbit to something suspended off of the nasociliary nerve called the ciliary ganglion. Like most autonomic ganglia in the head, our ganglia for parasympathetics is on trigeminal nerve. Then it takes the axons from cranial nerve V1 division, which is called the ophthalmic nerve, and we take its branches called the short ciliary nerves. These are going over to the sclera and cornea, so while they're on their way, they deliver these hitchhiking post-ganglionic parasympathetics over to the sphincter pupillae and the ciliaris muscles. The sphincter pupillae constrict the pupil to limit the light coming in since we don't need much. And the ciliaris muscles actually change the shape of the lens from anterior to posterior, giving us accommodation of the lens, and so that will give us more nearsighted focus. Lesions to this area would result in a wide-iasis, mydriasis, a dilated pupil, or cycloplegia, which is the inability to accommodate the lens. Okay, let's come back over to the two pathways associated with cranial nerve 7. Let's start with the first. Let's say we want to make our nose fill with mucus or our palatal rugae start to fill up and start to filter and trap things that are coming in. Or we want to lacrimate, we want to cry. We want to wash the eye full of lysozyme. So right here is the superior salvatory nucleus, which is found at caudal pons. We'll then hitchhike onto cranial nerve 7's facial nerve, which then gives off the greater petrosal nerve that joins up with deep petrosal to form the Vidian nerve. The Vidian nerve is also known as the nerve to the pterygoid canal. We go in through the pterygoid canal into the pterygopalatine fossa, where we find the largest parasympathetic ganglion called the pterygopalatine ganglion. The pterygopalatine ganglion is suspended from the maxillary nerve. Therefore, the postsynaptic branches travel mostly on cranial nerve 5's second division called the maxillary nerve. Maxillary nerve will meet up via the zygomatico-temporal branches to jump onto the lacrimal nerve, V1, to get over to the lacrimal gland. That pathway is described in my pterygopalatine fossa video, should you be so inclined to watch it. Then our target organs are things like the nasal cavity, the palate, and of course the lacrimal gland. Now, another cranial nerve 7 association actually goes down to salivary organs. So we're coming from the superior salivatory nucleus again at caudal pons, traveling on 7, but if we're going down to the floor of the mouth, we don't actually use the greater petrosal because greater petrosal is for palate. Chorda tympani is for tongue. So the T's go together and the P's go together. So cranial nerve 7 is going to take that facial nerve over to the chorda tympani, one of its branches, and then chorda tympani will join with a branch of V3, the mandibular nerve, called the lingual nerve. It's from the posterior division of the mandibular nerve. Lingual nerve is the only branch of trigeminal that carries both pre and post ganglionic parasympathetics. Typically, trigeminal carries post, so this is an exception that you may be asked. These structures are heading over to the submandibular ganglion suspended from the lingual nerve. And then the lingual nerve will carry it over to the sublingual gland, or postsynaptic unnamed branches will travel it straight down to the submandibular gland. And of course, the submandibular gland and sublingual glands receive this autonomic innervation via this parasympathetic pathway to help you salivate. Now, a different structure that's not so much on the front of the face, but on the side, is a different nucleus. So the way you can remember it is things that are facial or on the front of your face. For the inferior salivatory nucleus, this is for the parotid gland, which is on the side of your face. So this is the inferior salivatory nucleus. Different nucleus is that medulla oblongata of the brainstem. And it's going to travel on cranial nerve 9, which is the glossopharyngeal nerve, which then will give rise to the tympanic plexus, and a branch from that area will be the lesser petrosal nerve. The lesser petrosal nerve will carry those preganglionic parasympathetics over to its respective ganglion. The L in foramen ovale is for lesser petrosal, and then the O in ovale is a ganglion right below foramen ovale called the otic ganglion, suspended from the mandibular division of the trigeminal nerve. So cranial nerves V3 gives us the mandibular division, which suspends the otic ganglion, and therefore the auriculotemporal branch of V3 will then carry the postganglionic parasympathetics over to our amazing parotid gland, which opens behind the second maxillary molar via its duct. Then we have the major contributor to parasympathetics for most of the body. We're talking about thoracic organs, foregut, and midgut. The way that I remember it is vagus supplies most of this, because vagus is your nerve that's supplying things that end with X. Think thorax ends in the letter X for vagus. Think about going to Vegas and how you eat all the buffet, foregut, midgut. But it leaves behind the poo. You don't really clean up after yourself in Vegas, so Vegas doesn't deal with the hindgut. The dorsal motor nucleus located at the medulla oblongata then gives rise to axons that travel on cranial nerve 10. Cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve, vagus means wanderer, it's a very long nerve. Traveling into the thorax, it'll give off thoracic plexuses, things like the cardiac plexus, esophageal plexus, pulmonary plexus. And then it'll turn into anterior and posterior vagal trunks. Left vagus turns into anterior, right into posterior, to go through the esophageal hiatus of the diaphragm at T10, and then join up with mesenteric plexuses, things like the celiac plexus for the foregut and the superior mesenteric plexus for the midgut. They'll then synapse within the organ wall on things that are called unnamed ganglia or intramural ganglia within the organ wall. Intramural. It's not just for college sports, folks. Intramural means within the wall. So they'll actually synapse within the wall of their target organ. And these organs are basically communicated with their ganglion by these very, very short postsynaptic branches within the organ wall. And that will innervate things like the thorax and the foregut midgut. The midgut ends at that distal quarter of the transverse colon. So again, doesn't deal with the poo. Now, we have to cover the pelvic organs and cover what is not covered by vagus. So what's left over is hindgut and pelvic organs. These are innervated at their nucleus by the S2, S4 lateral horn cells. Typically, the lateral horn in the thorax and upper lumbar was for sympathetics, but in the sacral area, it's for parasympathetics. The only splanchnics we have that are parasympathetics just so happen to start with the letter P. Thank goodness, because most splanchnics are sympathetic, but the pelvic are para. These are preganglionic parasympathetics that then synapse on intramural ganglia within the organ wall of the structure they innervate. Very short postsynaptic branches exist within that organ wall to innervate things like the transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, rectum, as well as pelvic organs, things like the urinary bladder, things like the prostate, uterus. So that's a nice synopsis of how parasympathetic drive affects various organs. If you need to actually see a still of this, I'll include that in the link under the descriptions, and I hope you found this useful.